So, should we bring in the closer? And
I think it'd be a good time for that.
All right.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 53 of the Free Baseball Podcast. I'm Davis Barrett, as always, joined by number one Rockies fan, Jake Crumpler. We got a lot to talk about today. Obviously, we're off the back of the WBC, the World Baseball Classic, has ended, and we're going to continue our little division review that we have done. We're going to wrap it up with the NL West, home of podcast favorite baseball team, Colorado Rockies. And we're going to start with, as always, offseason transactions. And we just got one to talk about, and it's involving our favorite team, the Rockies. They signed Jurickson Profar to a 1 year, $7.75 million deal. But if he reaches 400 plate appearances, it would increase his salary to almost $9 million, but it's 8.75. And this is the funniest thing in the world, because we had a conversation about this, because after Brendan Rodgers, of course, their former top shortstop prospect that's moved to second to accommodate Tovar, got injured out for the season, they released a report that said Ryan McMahon, obviously Gold Glover for them, was going to move to second base. And we both had a conversation. It was like, oh, well, they got all these guys that could plug in and try to fit a young guy in because the Rockies are going to be bad. And then Jake literally said, nah, they'll sign someone stupid like Jurickson Profar to block them. And guess what they did? Literally 1 day later, they signed Jurickson Profar to block them. So a little soothsaying from Mr. Crumpler, but I don't know. This is one of the baseball moves of the offseason.
Yeah, not only did they sign Profar, but they also signed Mike Moustakas. So they were like, oh no, we could have young players playing this season. No. We're doubling down. We're bringing two veterans in to block any young player that might have the opportunity. Looks like Tovar is going to be the only guy in the starting lineup under the age of 28 as of right now, which is pretty bonkers. But yeah, I'll ignore the Moustakas signing for now. He's likely to play third base, pushing Ryan McMahon to second to fill in for Rodgers, and Profar is likely to play the outfield. I think a few weeks ago there was a report that he was at the Denver airport, so he'd been talking to the Rockies. But it's pretty surprising that he didn't really have too many suitors this year, because he was pretty solid last year. He's not a great hitter at this point in his career, but he is a guy that can play all over the field, be like a league average hitter, and play really solid defense. He had a 110 WRC plus last year. He doesn't strike out a lot. He walks quite a bit. He's like a 15 home run guy with a little bit of speed, but he was still 2.5 WAR last year, which was surprisingly, that's the best season of his career for a guy that was a former number one prospect. Definitely didn't live up to the hype, but you can't underrate the value of somebody that's able to be like an everyday baseball player. You know, it's hard to get that from any sort of minor leaguer, but I think we see Profar play left field or right field, allowing Bryant to go to whichever the opposite is. And he'll be solid there. He'll be interesting in terms of fantasy, because playing in Coors is going to pump up anybody's batting average because of its BABIP improving abilities. And this is a guy that has a 264 career BABIP, so we could definitely do with a little bit of improvement there. But other than that, I mean, this makes them World Series favorites, right?
Yeah, I'd have to think so. I wanted to say, like, okay, this is a great move for the trade deadline, because this is someone they'll just flip at the deadline. But the Rockies have already shown you could never move those guys, or just hold on to them forever. So
if they weren't going to trade John Gray at that one deadline after he said, "I'm not re-signing with you. I'm not signing an extension."
Story did the same thing. They
and then they didn't give them qualifying offers.
Yeah, they didn't give them a qualifying offer. Did they do the same thing last year with Jose Iglesias? And Jose Iglesias just kind of rot on the Rockies, or was that 2 seasons ago? Where they just had him on the
team last year.
Yeah, and they just never traded him. I don't believe. They just have a propensity to get these guys that would be prime flips at the deadline, and they just don't do it. They just like, nah, we like you here. You're going to stay here. So, yeah, Rockies are going to Rocky all the way to the bank, because they're going to win the World Series this year.
That would be absolutely crazy.
Yes, it would. And speaking of absolutely crazy, the World Baseball Classic has come to a close last night. So let's begin our review of it. We already kind of went over some of it last podcast, but obviously since then, a lot of things have changed. We went over pools A and B, and then pool C and D also finished since the whole thing's done, obviously. So with pool C, the U.S. did beat Colombia. We talked about that being a must-win game. It was literally the day of last podcast. They beat Colombia and advanced to the quarterfinals, and the MVP of Pool C was that MF named Randy. I think at this point, it's safe to say if you're talking baseball terms and you hear the word Randy, it's talking about Randy Arozarena because he's just big game Randy. He just shows up in moments like these and in tournaments like, well, I guess tournaments in the playoffs like these. He's just clutch. He just has the clutch gene.
He was huge for Team Mexico. It was pretty interesting to hear the story of how he became eligible for that team, defecting from Cuba, moving to Mexico, and playing for the Mexican League over there before getting his shot with the Cardinals minor league organization. And I'm pretty sure he reached out to the president of Mexico via Instagram and was like, "Let me play for your team." And that's all it took. So I guess he got like temporary citizenship or whatever. But yeah, that's pretty cool. He was huge for that team. I think many people were doubting Team Mexico. So to see him carry that team was really awesome. He just thrives in like big moments like this. We saw that with the Rays in the 2020 World Series. And it's just every single time there's something on the line where it's not the regular season, he's going to go off. And I think he's just one of the more underrated players across the league. Like he's super electric, power, speed. He made some great catches throughout this World Baseball Classic as well. So that, yeah, well deserved to win that MVP there.
Yeah, he's really enjoyable to watch. I do agree with you. He's one of the most underrated players in baseball just because he plays for the Rays. And I think everyone kind of expected him to continue his massive tear that he was on in the one postseason when they in the COVID shortened year. But nobody can sustain that. But he's still been an excellent player. But yeah, it's good to see the eyes back on Randy. Hopefully he can have a good season and follow it up. And then in Pool D, Puerto Rico beat the Dominican Republic and advanced to the quarterfinals. And the MVP of that group was Venezuela's Salvador Perez.
Yeah, there was a number of crazy things happening in that game. Not only did Puerto Rico knock off Dominican Republic, which was crazy in and of itself, because if not for Japan, I think Dominican Republic was like far and away the best team in the tournament in terms of the on paper. Their lineup was crazy. They had some great pitchers. They've been historically really great in this competition. And to see them knocked out in the first round, not even make it to the quarterfinals, is, I don't think, something anybody would have predicted. But that was a really tough pool with Puerto Rico and Venezuela there. So it's hard to it's hard to just place all the blame on Dominican Republic because those other teams were playing really well. But absolutely crazy to see them knocked out before even the quarterfinals. But then disaster struck after closing out that game. Edwin Diaz tore his patellar tendon, and I think everybody held their breath for like 3 days while we waited to hear what the news was going to be. Because I don't know, those situations when somebody gets injured like that and you have no idea what it's going to be, it's like, okay, he could be fine, ready for opening day, or he could be out for the season. And the difference between that is so massive. And everybody just sits there not knowing. And all they want to do is be like, please, like, don't let it be for the rest of the season. But that's exactly what it was. Super disappointing for the best reliever in baseball. I was pumped to like see him pitching in New York all year with the trumpets and everything. It was going to be sick. But yeah. What were you feeling during that time?
Dread. I always kind of assume the worst. I guess I have a naturally pessimistic nature, but I always was kind of assuming the worst. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. Because like you, I was really excited to see a full year of the Trumpets with Edwin Diaz and a Mets team that looks poised to really, really be a World Series contender again. And they probably still will. Obviously, I mean, they lose their star closer, but it's a large chunk of the good vibes around their team, I think, too. Yeah. And they lost that, which really sucks. It was pretty interesting later. I mean, we'll talk about it too, but they had Edwin Diaz's jersey chilling in like the locker, like in the dugout for the next game. Like he died. And then his brother is actually on the team. He came out to Narco. So he came out to Narco
The boy.
Unfortunately, he's no Edwin Diaz, so that was a little bit
Yeah.
different. But he did come out to Narco. That was a cute little moment. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
It is very unfortunate that Edwin is going to be gone for the season because we
Yeah.
all would like to see him pitch.
That jersey thing is just shades of Eloy Jimenez a couple years ago when he like
Yeah, Eloy
broke his
died. It's
neck. Yeah. All the memes of him like in heaven and stuff. It was just so funny. Like, yeah, no, the guy's fine. He's just at home watching Netflix. He's gonna be fine. But yeah, it sucks. Alexis Diaz was crying like at the game when that happened. What do you think the Mets are gonna do? Do you think they're just going to chill and be like, nah, David Robertson or Adam Ottavino's the closer? Or do you think they're going to be like, we're getting David Bednar, we're getting Alexis Diaz, just keep the Diaz brother. We need a Diaz closer. I mean, there's options out there. Scott Barlow as well. What are you thinking that they do here? Stay pat or trade for somebody?
I think they'll stand pat for now. I don't think they're going to trade for anybody in the immediate
Like a
term.
deadline thing?
I don't even think it'll be like at the deadline. I think it'll be closer to the deadline, but not quite. Maybe they'll have a little bit of bullpen woes. I feel like there'll be one that's like, okay, they have Robertson or whoever the closer by committee guy that kind of stands out the most. The one time he gets blown up, that's when they're going to go all panic mode and they're going to trade for somebody.
Yeah,
and
Frank the Tank just like explodes on Twitter, and Steve is just like, shoot, we need to do something.
My God, Frank the Tank is literally going to explode.
This season is going to be too much for him. I don't want to say this, but I'm calling it now. It's going to be heart attack. He's going to have a heart attack this year.
Yeah, so like I think the moment that someone gets blown up, it's like, okay, Bednar is now a Met or something similar like that. Barlow would be a good one. Who's another? Who's another one that they could just?
I said Alexis Diaz. If the Giants struggle, I mean, I don't think they'd trade Doval. They could just bring Trevor May back from the A's. There's options out there on bad teams. A lot of bad teams don't have good closers, and
they'll panic and send almost everybody for like Daniel Bard or something weird.
No, please no. That would be awful. Yeah, I don't know. It's gonna be interesting to see what they do there because I feel like their bullpen is like the weakest point on the team, and they really don't have too many options outside of the veterans that they got there. So, it should be interesting to watch.
Oh yeah, but that's it for our pool play. So we're gonna move on to the quarterfinals. Cuba defeated Australia and advanced to semifinals. That happened before a lot of the quarterfinals games were played.
Yeah.
And before even the pool, like some of the pools games ended, which is crazy to me.
The scheduling on that was so weird.
Yeah, it was. And then Japan beat Mexico and advanced to the semis. Like it felt like forever after this, and it was like a couple days. But Japan
that should have been Italy.
Oh yeah, excuse me. Japan beat Italy relatively convincingly.
Flags are so similar now that I look at it. Literally the same flag, just with a logo in the middle.
Yeah. So Japan defeated Italy and advanced to the semifinals. The U.S. defeated Venezuela and advanced to the semis. And then Mexico beat Puerto Rico thanks to sort of kind of a blown save situation. I guess it wasn't really a save situation, but Alexis Diaz actually came in and got the game blown wide open by Mexico. So he came out to Narco and then gave up like 30 runs to lose, which is very unfortunate.
Yeah.
So yeah, Mexico was sort of Mexico were dogs in this tournament. They were really, really tough out. They were probably the surprise team for me.
Like I said, they had an underrated roster, especially on the starting pitching side with like Urias and Patrick Sandoval. They had some really solid guys out there. And I don't think many people were considering them. Yeah. And Taiwan Walker. Like just having four major league guys on that team. Having four major league guys on that team is not something in the rotation is a testament to how solid their team was, but I don't think anybody was considering them as like a Final Four team. So that was pretty crazy. Did you have a favorite game amongst this group? I feel like one stands out since they were all pretty close. Yeah, in the quarterfinal games, yeah.
In the quarters, the easiest answer is U.S. Venezuela in it, but Mexico Puerto Rico was a really good game. I watched almost all of Mexico Puerto Rico. That game was really, really good. I think I watched most of the U.S. and Venezuela, but my favorite game was Mexico Puerto Rico because it's the one I got to watch all of.
Yeah. So Davis was alluding to USA Venezuela being the best game because Trey Turner hit that go ahead grand
Oh
slam,
yeah.
which was crazy. He had a huge tournament and it sort of started at this point where he hit that grand slam. It really seemed for a moment like USA was going to get beat because Venezuela had the undefeated run through the pool play, and USA sort of struggled through their pool. And it seemed like Venezuela was on top there. And then Trey Turner just turned everything around. And that's when USA started gaining a lot of momentum that really carried into the next round as well. But that was pretty crazy. I think the Cuba Australia game was closer than I thought it would be, but it was an expected outcome there. Australia has very few major league guys, but honestly, they impressed me. I mean, the Australian Baseball League is not really well known for being a thing at all, but they had some solid guys that looked pretty interesting. So I'd be excited to see more guys from that league head over to the United States. But yeah, that was I think the quarterfinals were a lot of fun. Once we got out of the multiple losses phase of the pool play, it was fun to see like the winner go home matchups.
Oh yeah. Mexico Puerto Rico was a really really exciting game too because Puerto Rico put up a 4 spot in the first inning, and then Mexico battled all the way back
Nice.
and took the lead in the 7th, and then never gave it up. Their pitching after the first inning was so good. And Mexico's bullpen, we talked about their starters. Mexico's bullpen was really good this tournament. Giovanni Gallegos was very, very good up until a certain event that we'll maybe talk about later. But yeah, Mexico's pen was really good. I enjoyed watching that game. And then moving on to the semifinals, obviously. The USA, the United States of America, baby. They beat Cuba, destroyed Cuba, advanced to the finals. And then Japan had one of the games of all time in the WBC, I think, against Mexico in order to get to the finals. That game was really, really special. I also watched every minute of that one. Yeah, that was a game.
Yeah, we'll start with the USA one because it was not as exciting. They just seemed to really outmatch Cuba. Trey Turner hit 2 more home runs in that game. I think he had back-to-back plate appearances on back-to-back pitches, hitting home runs, like carrying over from the grand slam that he hit to the first home run he hit against Cuba. So that was really the peak of his run. But yeah, it's like the offense finally turned on and they just destroyed Cuba, sort of showed them who's boss. But that game really wasn't as competitive as you would have hoped. So USA kind of easily moved on to the finals. But yeah, that Japan-Mexico game, that was probably the game that I watched the most of throughout the entire tournament, being on the West Coast. But yeah, that was crazy. I don't know why it's showing me the wrong game, but yeah, I was watching that one, and I really thought Mexico was going to go through, and I was like, dang, like a Mexico USA, that could be pretty interesting. But I know you and I were both rooting for Japan here, and it just had such a crazy finish. It was back and forth throughout the whole game. Like Mexico was up 3 in the 4th, and then Japan scored 3 in the 7th on the Masataka Yoshida 3-run dinger to tie it up. And then
off the foul pole.
Yeah, Mexico immediately took the lead back. Japan ticked off a run, and then in the bottom of the 9th, I'll let you go through this one.
Yeah, in the bottom of the 9th, where Ohtani walked, I think, and then before that,
he came up, and I was like, "Oh, Ohtani's going to come through right here." He hit a double right away.
Yeah, he hit a double, and then the next batter walked, which was I don't remember which hitter it was, but he ended up getting pinch ran for Ukyo
That was
Shuto.
Yoshida.
Yeah, Yoshida ended up getting pinch ran by Ukyo Shuto, who can absolutely fly. Yeah. And then guy we've talked about a ton. He's going to be really exciting when he inevitably comes over. But young Japanese phenom Munetaka Murakami doubled to, was it right center?
Left center.
Left center. Ohtani scored, and then Ukyo Shuto rounded the bases in
right behind him.
Yeah, so literally on Ohtani's heels. And it's Ohtani, and if you don't know, Ohtani is already one of the fastest players in baseball.
Yeah.
And Ukyo Shuto was nipping at his heels. And Japan scored, walked it off, spectacular fashion. It was their first lead of the game. That they took to go ahead and make the finals, which I guess we can go ahead and talk about now. So final obviously is the USA and Japan. And I guess sort of to our dismay, the US lost to Japan. The score was at 3-2. Jake didn't get to watch hardly any of the game because he was complaining about the start time being off.
I was in traffic for an hour and a half and had work for the first hour of the game. I literally missed the first 6 innings. Like, I don't know how they expect somebody on the West Coast to watch that.
Yeah, that was that sucked. But this game was really good. I think the U.S. used up a little too many of their runs to knock off Cuba. They were only able to get 2 across against Japan. But Japan's pitching staff really did an excellent job. The starters were Kyle Freeland and Roki Sasaki, correct?
No, not Roki Sasaki. He pitched the Mexico game.
Who started for them?
It was Merrill Kelly for USA, and Japan had Imanaga.
I need to find the box score again. Yeah, they ended up using pretty much everybody for it, though, that they had available. Oh yeah, Sasaki did start against them.
Yeah. So USA, half of their runs came from a Trey Turner home run in the second inning. So his run kept going all the way through the finals, which was crazy. But then in the bottom of the second, Japan fought right back with a Murakami dinger to tie it up. And then Lars Nootbaar had an RBI ground out later that inning. And then we saw Kazuma Okamoto homer in the bottom of the fourth to make it a 3-1 game. And then it really started getting exciting after that as we entered like the 8th inning. Did you watch the whole game? Like, were you watching intently?
Pretty much all the game. I missed the first. I think I ended up missing the first 2 or 3 innings.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I did get to see everything that he did.
Yeah, the 8th inning was crazy because I was recording a podcast during the entire game after I got back from driving through traffic, and that Schwarber at bat versus Darvish was crazy. I didn't have my full attention towards it, but every time I looked down, it was like a foul ball home run on like 4 straight pitches, and it's like Schwarber versus Darvish, like both like big former Cubs fighting for their countries, and then Schwarber was the one who won the battle, hitting a huge home run to make it 3-2. That was crazy. And then from there, it was just, I mean, not only Darvish coming in the 8th inning was bonkers, but then they took it to another level and brought in Shohei Ohtani to close out the game in the 9th. And we saw what may be one of the craziest epic at-bats of all time with 2 of the, I want to say, top 10, top 5 best players of all time in Shohei Ohtani facing Mike Trout, bottom of the 9th. Didn't it get to 3-2 as well?
Yeah, it was 3-2. 3-2.
3-2, bottom of the 9th, down by 1. Mike Trout versus Shohei Ohtani. Like, just whoever was putting on the WBC, whoever planned the whole thing, that was their dream. That's the dream ending right there. And then to see Shohei strike him out with one of the most perfect sliders you'll ever see, and to win that tournament and the WBC MVP award was crazy. It was awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of positives to take, though. It was an exciting game. Obviously, I think both of us are a little disappointed that the U.S. didn't win, but it was a great game, and that's what you can really hope for. You got to see a bunch of guys. I'll bang the drum for Japan. We did our way too early predictions, and I chose Japan. I was like, Japan's going to be one of the best teams in the tournament, and I'm right.
Well
Unfortunately, I'm right.
No, fortunately, I was rooting for Team Japan, to be completely honest.
Well, they were the best baseball team.
They didn't lose a single game.
No, they didn't. They were the best baseball team in the tournament, and it ended up not really being that close. But there's a lot of guys that ended up being really exciting for them. I've talked about Yoshinobu Yamamoto, talked about Murakami, talked about Roki Sasaki. Obviously, there's been Nootbaar. Everyone likes Nootbaar. I love you, Darvish. The guy that ended up being the star in the final was Kazuma Okamoto, and they literally talk. Japan's manager literally talked about Kazuma Okamoto being like the ace in the hole. It's like this guy's a star and nobody's seen it yet. And then he popped off and really propelled them to victory. And it's like, well, who's this guy? And then you look at his stats, and that guy's crazy too. He's only 26, and he's had let me see, he's had 5 straight seasons with at least 30 home runs, and he's won a Gold Glove in every single one of them in Japan.
That's crazy.
Yeah, he's crazy. And he plays for the Yomiuri Giants. So he's like the star first baseman for their Yankees equivalent. And it's like, okay, well, nobody knows who this guy is. And it's just be prepared to be dogged by this guy. US.
Yeah, I'm so excited for this group of young Japanese players to head over to MLB and finally get the recognition that they deserve. I did want to point out Trey Turner's 5th home run of the WBC, the one that he hit in the second inning of the finals, tied him for the most home runs in a single WBC with some Korean guy who I can't remember his name, but it was at like 2006 that occurred. So that was pretty awesome as well.
Oh, wow. In case you're also wondering, Kyle Schwarber homered in the final. So that makes Kyle Schwarber homering in the NL wildcard, AL wildcard, NLDS, ALDS, NLCS, ALCS, World Series more than once, and World Baseball Classic championship game. So Kyle Schwarber, we talked about Randy Arozarena being a big game player. Kyle Schwarber, big game player. He just does everything. So as unfortunate as it is that the U.S. lost, because I'm American, wave the flag. Japan, best baseball team. They really deserved it. Hard to be mad about it. It's like it's tournament play. Eventually, the best team just kind of comes out on top more often than not, and Japan did that.
Give me MLB The Show. I want to play with those players so bad.
Oh, yeah, and I'm super excited for that. But I think you're completely right. If they could have written a perfect script, it being bottom of the 9th down to Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani 3-2. Any outcome there, like that's what you dream of if you're script writing for this. Yeah. So World Baseball Classic has come to a close. It's one of the best ones really in recent memory. It was a really, really good tournament, top to bottom. And we can go ahead and announce the all WBC team. You talked about the WBC MVP, Shohei Ohtani. He's going to feature in here a couple times, which is pretty cool. So starting at catcher, we have Salvador Perez of Venezuela. First base is Yu Chang of Chinese Taipei. We talked about him last podcast where he just went thermonuclear and was the only hitter on their team that could possibly do anything. Javier Baez. Baez had a really good tournament too for Puerto Rico. He had a big home run in their game against Mexico, the first home run in their first inning, and then he hit one in the quarterfinal, I think.
He had a double in the quarterfinal.
Yeah, but Baez had a really good tournament. Yohan Moncada was the best player for Cuba. He's featuring at third base. And then Trey Turner, you said, tying the home run record, is going to be starting at short. And outfield, really exciting. Randy Arozarena, Mike Trout, and Masataka Yoshida. We've been banging the drum for Yoshida, too, on the podcast because we're both really excited to see him come over and play. He had a really good tournament. DH is going to be Shohei Ohtani as well as the number one pitcher, Shohei Ohtani. So he's on there twice, as well as Patrick Sandoval quietly had a really, really good tournament, and Miguel Romero from Cuba. So really exciting WBC. Super stoked for the next one. Hopefully the U.S. can get back to winning. This will potentially light a fire under them because they cannot retain their crown. So here's hoping to another great WBC for the next one.
Yeah, this was like a really amazing appetizer that you have before the main course, and you just hope that the main course can live up to it. But, the dessert will probably be very similar to the appetizer, the dessert being the playoffs. What a great analogy, Jake.
Speaking of a great little appetizer for the main course, so we are going to jump right into our NL West offseason review. We've been doing all the other ones. It's the last division that we've got to talk about. Going straight from the super exciting World Baseball Classic to let's talk about the Rockies, our favorite baseball team on the podcast. They had an off season. They had one of the off seasons in baseball. And here are their additions. So through free agency, they've added Jose Urania, Pierce Johnson, Harold Castro, Brad Hand, and the aforementioned from Jake Crumpler, Mike Moustakas, and then
And Profar.
Oh, yeah, and Jerkson Profar. Jake forgot to add it, so I forgot to mention it. Brent Suter was also added through waivers. That guy pitches. And Nolan Jones was a big addition through trade. Subtractions, all through free agency. They lost Garrett Hampson. They lost Alex Colomé, Jose Iglesias, Carlos Estevez, and Chad Kuhl. They traded away Sam Hilliard and Connor Joe, and then they lost Scott Oberg to the retirement list. They also extended Tyler Kinley. They extended Daniel Bard during the season, so that doesn't count, I guess. But yeah, the Rockies added some guys that do, in fact, play professional baseball.
Pretty sure this is S tier. Can't tell if I just lost you or if you just turned off your everything.
I was blowing my nose. I don't want to be disgusting.
I was just like,
no, I'm still here. I was blowing my nose. I don't want to be gross on camera.
No worries. That's a good idea. My brother always blows his nose during dinner, and I hate it. Yeah.
He really sounds like a weirdo.
Well, he's getting back at me for farting during dinner, so.
Yeah, that's gross too. You're a disgusting human being.
Well, let's talk about a disgusting baseball team.
Okay.
Yeah, they just looking at the guys that they lost, you're just like, why do they employ such bad players? And then you look at the teams, the guys that they acquired, and they really didn't do much of anything. It's just S tier for me, to be completely honest. The Rockies are so good. I don't know. I can't even give them an F tier, just because they're so bad. Like, I don't even know. It's clearly an F tier because they didn't do anything. They brought in some like depth guys. They added Moustakas and Profar to block their young players. They added Brad Hand, who's gonna like finish out his career in horrible fashion, and they traded for Nolan Jones, who they optioned to AAA before the season has started. And the guys that they lost weren't great either, but like, you're still losing guys that were good for you last year, like Carlos Estevez. I think they never let Sam Hilliard sort of reach his potential. Same with Garrett Hampson, and they traded Connor Joe for no reason. And then they extended the most random reliever they possibly could, Tyler Kinley, who is recovering from, where is he? Yeah, flexor tendon surgery. So I don't even think he's going to pitch this year. If he does, it'll be later in the year. But just like such a nothing off season, where it's just they lost a bunch of horrible. I don't want to say horrible. It's mean. Lost a bunch of bad players and added more bad players. Yeah, and just blocked the young guys on their team. They just have no direction. They just like to do stuff. They're like, oh, I like that guy. He seems fun. Let's bring him in. And then it's like, oh, the fun guy that they brought in is Harold Castro.
God, what a baseball team.
Yeah.
I think their run is a social experiment. Yeah. I genuinely think their run is a social experiment. They're absolutely horrible. The thing about it is, like, I want to be nice, but you can't, because like everything they did makes literally no sense. Jose Urania has been bad almost his entire career. Nolan Jones is like one of the promising ones. It's like, okay, cool. That makes some sense. You got, Brendan Rodgers. Okay, he gets hurt. Maybe, you move McMahon to second and you give a chance to Nolan Jones, who he's has a bunch of promise, and he's got a really smooth left-handed swing that he hits for a ton of pop. He hit for a lot of power in the minors. And then you immediately block him by signing Mike Moustakas, who has been able to play baseball approximately for 45 minutes in the last 3 years. He can't play. And it's like, oh, let's block Nolan Jones. Let's never play any players that are young and never give them a chance. And then let's also go out and we'll really try to bolster our pitching staff by adding Pierce Johnson. Pierce Johnson has had one half decent season ever. He's been one of the most random, just okay relievers. Like, there's a reason he was a free agent, man. Like,
there's a reason he had to sign with the Rockies.
There's a reason he had to sign with the Rockies. They also, one of the craziest ones to me is they picked up, like, I get it was a waiver claim, but they picked up Brent Suter. they are giving Brent Suter a death sentence by putting that guy in Coors. Brent Suter is a soft tossing lefty that gets no fastball spin. He has no velo. He's literally going to go to the Rockies to die. Like
Batting practice.
he's going to throw it. He's throwing BP. That's literally what they have him for. He's throwing BP. Guess who's also going to be throwing BP? Brad Hand. Brad Hand hasn't been good in like 3 years either. He's the same thing where I get the mold of guy that they want, but it's not the mold of guy that they should be getting. And they're trying to copy what they have in Herman Marquez of guys that throw low spin fastballs and throw a million sliders. And they're getting the guys that do it the worst. Like, just get guys that do it okay. They're never going to have success with this whack mold that they're building their team in. It doesn't work. Like, the guys that they got just don't fit. Jurickson Profar could be okay, and they could trade him at the deadline, but we already said that earlier. They don't do that. Mike Moustakas, he could be a decent little trade chip. I get signing Moustakas in a vacuum. You know, like, okay, he's a bounce back guy. Maybe you put him in Coors and he goes off and you can trade him at the deadline and you'll get a decent little haul for him. But number one, Mike Moustakas doesn't stay healthy. Number two, the Rockies don't trade guys at the deadline. And number three, really, when they trade guys, they never get good returns. They always get hosed in every single trade that they make. Like, so the Rockies, it's like an F- because like it's the literal worst possible grade you can give them because they signed a bunch of guys that block young players that need to be getting ABs because they're just very clearly not going to trade anybody. They're so directionless and make absolutely no sense as a baseball team. They still have a bunch of money tied into Charlie Blackmon. They need to trade Charlie Blackmon. Contender,
nobody wants him.
Somebody should take him close to the end of his deal. Like a team like the Astros could do something with Charlie Blackmon. The Dodgers could use Charlie Blackmon. They turned Charlie Blackmon into a 6-WAR hitter, guaranteed. And it's just so garbage. They signed Chris Bryant to this mega deal for what? This team's never going to be competitive in the next 4 years. So you're wasting the prime of Chris Bryant. You're just going to be paying him forever. I don't understand this baseball team. I really honestly think they just kind of put everything into a randomizer spin wheel. And it's like, who do we sign? Or, like the SpongeBob episode where they got the magic conch. And it's like, should we sign Brad Hand? Yes. Okay. They got him on the other line on the phone. How's this sound for you, Brad Hand? Deal. Like, should we pick up Brent Suter on waivers so he can go throw BP and Coors?
Yeah. In that episode, don't they ask a question and they're like, "Are you sure that's what they want?" Like, they're just like, "Should we sign one of the big free agents?" And the Magic Conch is like, "No," and they're like, "Wait, are you sure we shouldn't sign one of the big free agents?" They're like,
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my God. It's such a stupid baseball team. It's the worst possible grade I could give them. And if genuinely the moves in a vacuum are fine, but factoring the environment and factoring what we know about how incompetent the Rockies are run, it's hard to be like, yeah, sure, why not? They made the Nolan Jones move as one of the earliest ones in the offseason, and I praised that. That's awesome move. They gave up effectively nothing to get a high ceiling prospect that really fits what they could be doing. Left-handed swing, a lot of power. They need a corner infielder, or he could play second wherever. And you could have a nice little piece for a rebuilding Rockies team. And then it's like, okay, we're instantly going to block him with Mike Moustakas, and we're going to throw him in AAA. For what? For what? You're wasting fun. You're just wasting him.
For the memes, bro.
For real, for the memes. And it's hard for me to have any sympathy for the Rockies. And there's a reason that we always trash them. They're our podcast favorite team because we always get to come on here and just talk shit about the Rockies being terrible. So, I would give this one an F- if possible.
Good call.
So moving on to more real baseball teams. This time with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Here are their big additions. They actually added a lot of guys specifically through trade. So 3 big names that they added through trade: Lourdes Gurriel Jr., Gabriel Moreno, and Kyle Lewis. And then through free agency, they added Zach Davies, Juris Familia, Andrew Chafin, Miguel Castro, Scott McGough, and then through waivers, they had Cole Sulcer. I think that's how it's pronounced. And then subtraction.
And it's McGuff.
McGuff. Okay. That's weird. McGuff.
Have to get used to it. It's going to be the GOAT.
And then through subtractions, through trade, they lost Dalton Varsho, Cooper Hummel. They also lost J.B. Bukowskis through waivers. And then through free agency, they lost a plethora, a who's who of guys that have played baseball at one point. Ian Kennedy, Jordan Luplow, Stone Garrett, Reyes Maranta. I thought that guy was going to be really good at one point. And Caleb Smith, all through free agency. And then we talked about it. Was it last pod? Big extension for Corbin Carroll, number 2 prospect in baseball.
Yeah, I love this offseason, to be completely honest. I'm just gonna say right off the bat, this is an A for me, and it's I wouldn't even say it's leaning B. I think it's leaning more towards S tier or just solid in the middle of A tier. This is a great offseason. I'll start off with the fact that those guys who listed off as their subtractions, nobody cares. I mean, Dalton Varsho is the only one. Varsho is the only one that matters because he's a Gold Glove caliber outfielder who can play catcher and is a power speed guy. Let's see how much WAR he was worth last year, but that was the only guy that you sort of see and you're like, oh shoot, yeah, they lost that guy. The rest of the guys are all just random veteran relievers or backup guys that aren't going to make a big difference on the team. And I think the Varsho trade was good because it actually gives them some great players in return. Varsho was 4.6 F4 last year in a career season at the age of 25. So yeah, but the fact that they were able to get major league ready guys out of that makes it easier to stomach. And then I think they did some great things with the additions. They made the bullpen a lot stronger, adding Castro, McGuff, and Chafin. That bullpen is actually very solid now. It's hard to figure out who's the closer, but that doesn't mean that it's not good. And then they improved the offense, bringing in, veteran like Longoria and Gurriel Jr., who will be able to play on the left side of the field and, just make the offense solid and reliable and not having to rely heavily on young guys coming up. I think both of those guys are pretty underrated. And then to bring in upside guys like Kyle Lewis and Gabriel Moreno is exciting. I think Moreno's one of the more underrated acquisitions of the offseason just because he was one of the top prospects in all of baseball last year. He's like a super high contact guy who could grow into some power, and he seems like he's going to be a solid fit at catcher, especially once we move into the robo-ump days where he's just doesn't have to worry about framing and can just use his cannon arm to really be a plus guy behind the plate. And with Carson Kelly fracturing his arm just a few days ago, Moreno's going to be the everyday catcher. So it seems like that was a good trade with hindsight now. And yeah, I'm just loving everything they did. And then to cap everything off by extending one of the brightest young baseball players in the game in Corbin Carroll, one of the next guys in the wave of stars entering the league, is just like the perfect way to cap off an amazing offseason.
Yeah, their team looks definitely poised to be
third place.
Third place. But I definitely I wouldn't say bad but fun, but I honestly don't think they're just going to be that bad.
No, they're like a 500 team. Looks like.
Yeah, they're gonna be a 500 team. I think is very accurate. I really love their offseason, and it's just because the way the rest of their roster is constructed. I talked about and complained that the Rockies roster construction makes absolutely no sense. And the D-backs are like the complete antithesis. They've had a very clear plan. They've done well. They've drafted well. And they've really deserved to be where they're at. And I think they'll be an exciting team in the next few years. So even though looking at their offseason now where they get guys like Moreno, who I really like, Kyle Lewis, who I think is could be a pretty big bounce back guy. They didn't really give up all that much for him. And then guys that really fit. I think one that I forgot to talk about was Evan Longoria. I think Evan Longoria still provides a little bit of value. Plus everyone loves Longoria. Like he's still on trajectory to potentially be a Hall of Famer, which I think is always fun. And he's a really good veteran to have around a young team that really deserve it. Their bullpen's very good. I'm a big Chafin fan. And Jerry Familia is very good too. Zach Davies is unfortunate because he's kind of a jerk. So that's the only real ding I have against them. I think this is an A offseason. The rest of their team is constructed insanely well. The only thing that I would have really wanted them to see is maybe get a little bit more for your starting pitching staff, or a little bit of a better guy than Zach Davies. Just because that ballpark is not going to be very kind to Zach Davies, I don't believe. But that sucks for him. Sucks for the D-backs. But yeah, I mean, their prospect list looks really good too. So for the next couple seasons, obviously, right now they have Corbin Carroll, who's their number one prospect because he's the number two prospect in all of baseball. He's going to be coming up. But then they have dudes in the farm system that look to be making like an impact sooner rather than later, like Dre Jameson, Ryan Nelson, Brandon Pfaadt, Blake Walston in the next year or two, along with Jordan Lawler. Like their team looks set up for the future. Super exciting times for the Diamondbacks. I would probably give this one an A. I think if they had got a little bit better for the starting pitching staff, I would give this an S, and it would be super easy to do so. But as things stand, this is an A offseason, and I'm really excited to watch the Diamondbacks this year.
Me too. I just hope they don't prevent the Giants from having a good season.
That's exactly right. And speaking of the Giants, we will talk about them now as well. So the San Francisco Giants had a little bit of a fall off last season compared to the season before, but they made some big additions in hopes to get back there. Jake has added a funny haha in here. They have added. I
forgot about that.
Yeah, so they added Jock Peterson. They added Mitch Haniger, Sean Manaea, Ross Stripling, Michael Conforto, Taylor Rogers, Luke Jackson, Roberto Perez, Steven Piscotty, and Sergio Romo, all through free agency, in addition to the ghost of Carlos Correa and Arson Judge. So they got all those guys through free agency. And then the ones that they lost, Shelby Miller, Carlos Rodon, Brandon Belt, Evan Longoria. Is it Harleen Garcia?
Yep.
And Tommy La Stella, all through free agency. They didn't make any other moves, no trades, no waiver claims, no extensions, just moves strictly through free agency. New names in the door, old names getting out of here, getting out of town.
They made trades and waiver claims. They were just very minor and not really worth mentioning. Yeah. No big waiver claims. Yeah. So, yeah, they seem to do most of their damage in free agency, which was good. I think the sort of the wider conscious of what we consider the Giants offseason is sort of corrupted by the Arson Judge and the Carlos Correa scandals. Without those, I think we would be praising the Giants for having another like very solid offseason. They added a lot of guys. They added to their outfield, which is something they've been needing to do for a while. And they added guys that should be solid and aren't going to prevent the team from making moves going forward because they're on short-term deals that aren't super high AAV. Haniger and Conforto should be solid, especially if Haniger can not be injured like he already is. And then they made some very solid additions to the rotation with Manaea and Stripling, who I think are going to be really good. Stripling is probably going to be more solid than good, but I think they're going to reach another level with Manaea. I think he was already throwing like 3 or 4 miles per hour faster, which is just exactly what you would expect after going through the cheating, the cheating laboratory factory, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I mean, they did that. And then they also brought back Jock Peterson, which was huge. And I think the Taylor Rogers signing is really underrated because he's a great reliever. I think they got him on a pretty solid discount as well. He should really pair very nicely with Camilo Doval at the end of game. He gets to pitch with his twin brother, which is really cool. I don't know if we've ever seen twins on the same team. The only thing that you can say is like they lost Carlos Rodon. I mean, Brandon Belt's getting old. You know, he was sort of a platoon guy as well. Same with Evan Longoria, and nobody else they lost was pretty big. But Rodon was like the ace of the team last year. He was absolutely but we already know he's dealing injury. So they had some foresight on that. I mean, this is a guy that has been injured throughout his career often, and they would have had to commit a lot of money to him. I'm not saying I wouldn't have on the team, but considering where we're at right now with the hindsight of the injury, I'm sort of like glad that didn't happen. But, you know, missing out on Arson Judge was disappointing. I mean, they got Arson Judge. Missing out on Aaron Judge was disappointing, and the Correa stuff was weird. But, you know, I feel a little confident about that after the whole Mets thing as well, and him signing for a very reduced price with the Twins. I think a B offseason. I think it's pretty clearly a B. leaning more towards A than below that, because they lost one big guy and they replaced him with a lot of other guys. I wish they would have gotten Aaron Judge or Carlos Correa's ankle wasn't the worst ankle I've ever seen. But yeah, I feel pretty good about this season, though I don't think it pushes them to that upper echelon of teams like the Dodgers like I wish it would have.
Yeah, B is pretty fair for me. Losing out on Aaron Judge was really unfortunate because I think we'd been talking about like one of the biggest fits that's a non-Yankees team for Aaron Judge was the Giants, just because they really need home run hitters.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing for losing out on Correa, but I agree. I think losing out on Correa is something you can stomach a little bit more, seeing all the weird stuff and saga that's been going on with Correa and the injury and the ankle and all sorts of stuff. So I think they were right to probably step away. They added a lot of guys I do really like. I know you talked about Mania coming to the cheating lab. Ross Stripling is going to be eating nails coming through the cheating lab. He's really good. He already was very good. And then putting him through whatever the Giants do to all of their pitchers is going to be special. Luke Jackson, I think he's still is he still rehabbing from Tommy John?
Yeah, he's going to make a late debut this season.
Yeah, but I think he's on a 2-year deal, correct?
Yeah, he's on one of those. I think it's an option.
A year and an option. Yeah, they added guys I like. I mean, Mitch Haniger, I think, is a really good one, along with Jock Peterson and Michael Conforto. They added a lot of guys that have power potential because that's what they sorely lacked in the last couple of years. They just don't have guys that hit a lot of home runs. And they added 2 guys that could potentially hit a lot of home runs, and Mitch Haniger, who's probably not like a 30 home run guy, but more along the lines of like 25, but he's a very good hitter. I really like what they've done here. Steven Piscotty, too, I think is a relatively underrated one because they just always platoon everybody, and he'll be one that's just going to be beneficial of that. So they added a lot of guys that I'm a big fan of. Guys that they lost outside of Rodon, I don't think there's really anyone that they're going to be like really hurting over. Rodon sort of sucks, but they added Mania, and they added Stripling, and they still have guys in their rotation that are good. And their top pitching prospect is Kyle Harrison. He'll probably be up in the next year or two. So I think they'll live with that one too. Carlos Rodon, maybe he was just never going to re-sign. So that one is tough to look at. I think this is a B. If they had landed one of those stars, I think that's an S, and it's not really remotely close. But they did not, and they filled that void with a bunch of dudes that could be really good. And I would trust the Giants, though. It's tough. It's tough to look at the Giants because they're run so well and be like, oh, this offseason kind of sucks. It seems like they had a very clear plan, addressed some of the holes in the lineup. And it's like, look, we need guys that hit for power. They got some guys that I would trust also for them to get the most out of in their rotation and bullpen. So I'm a big fan of their offseason. I would give it a high B. Maybe even an A. I think I'm going to go A. I'll be a little bit more positive than Jake about his own team. So let's go A for the Giants.
Yeah, it's. I feel like fans of teams are usually the ones that are toughest on them.
Yeah. I would give it an A. Maybe a lower end A. Missing out on the big star, I think, was a little unfortunate. But I think if they didn't get Correa, I really don't feel like they were going to be in on one of the other shortstops because Trey Turner came off the board really early. They never really seemed kind of like a fit for Bogarts. And I don't think they were going to be a team. If they weren't willing to spend the money on Correa, I don't think they were willing to spend a lot of money on Dansby Swanson either. So I think it was sort of Correa or bust for them. They didn't get Correa because of the weird issue, didn't get Judge because of a apparent last minute intervention with the Yankees. So, I mean, they did what they could. They just didn't come away with the big prize that they really wanted. But now they'll have money to throw around the next offseason because the Giants have the money to burn. So get ready for next offseason where I think they will be really, really poised to land a star. Maybe Ohtani.
Give us Shohei. Please give us Shohei.
Maybe if Ohtani doesn't sign with the Cubs. That'd be cool. So, but moving on, we'll talk about the San Diego Padres and their 5 quadrillion guys that they signed. So all of these moves, major ones through free agency, they've added Robert Suarez, Nick Martinez, Xander Bogaerts, Seth Lugo, Matt Carpenter, Brent Honeywell, Adam Engel, Nelson Cruz, Michael Waka, Cole Hamels, and Roughneck Odor, all through free agency. And then through free agency, they lost a bunch of guys as well. Sean Manaea, aforementioned, to the Giants. They lost Mike Clevenger, Josh Bell, Brandon Drury, Pierce Johnson, Jurickson Profar, Will Myers, and Jorge Alfaro. They extended Yu Darvish, and they extended Manny Machado. So yeah, this is an offseason. I think they're chasing champions of the offseason for what, 2-3 seasons in a row now. Yeah, the Padres just have a infinite money glitch to sign absolutely everybody, and it's refreshing. Honestly, it's really refreshing to see an owner of a small market team really willing to pour in the money. It's like, okay, our team's going to be good. I'm going to will it into existence. I will pay whatever I have to pay for my team to be good. And I love that, because then you look at bum teams like the Reds and the Athletics who are just like, whatever. Our team is a money-making vehicle, and I think that's bad for the sport. So before I even get to the grade, there's my little rant. It's bad for the sport for teams to be unwilling to try to win because they don't want to spend any money. Teams for sports should be more about actually competing rather than trying to make money, because stupid. If your team is good, you will make money. It just is so ass backwards, and it's nice to see that the Padres kind of have it right.
Yeah, they definitely had what could be considered the best offseason, if not for some of the pretty solid players that they lost. I'll start there because they did lose some guys that were key members of the team, and like Manaea and Clevenger out of the rotation. And I don't know, probably good that they lost Will Myers after he sort of route hitter in San Diego. But the rest of the guys that they lost were sort of just they were just guys that were on the team. I mean, Josh Bell and Brandon Drury, they had great seasons last year, but they were like mid-season acquisitions. They didn't have the intention of keeping these guys on the team into the future. They were sort of there to just improve the odds going into the 2020 or going into the 2022 playoffs. So I'm not super concerned about any of the guys that they lost. I don't think many of them are star level players or guys that are, they're more like guys that are role players rather than somebody that's going to be the big difference maker on the team. And they more than made up for it by signing just about everybody. They started it off by bringing Suarez back on a pretty lucrative deal for a reliever that's pitched 1 year in MLB, but he's got a pretty decent resume from his time in Japan. And then they did the same with Nick Martinez, who basically same situation as Suarez, just having pitched in the United States before going overseas. And then from there, they just signed everybody. I mean, the Xander Bogaerts deal is something that you wouldn't expect a team with so many shortstops on their team. Like Machado's basically a shortstop with how good he is at third base, and Tatis, obviously, Ha-Seong Kim was a shortstop. Jake Cronenworth was even a shortstop coming up through the minors. So they just got so many guys, and they were like, you know what? It's always good to add talent. They spent a ton of money to bring Bogaerts in, and now that team's looking even better. They're moving Tatis to the outfield, and then they just added everybody else. They added Lugo, who's probably going to be part of the rotation, added Waka, who's sort of just a guy, but he's replaces guys like Manaea and Clevenger pretty easily. And then they got like the big old sluggers in Matt Carpenter and Nelson Cruz, which should be really interesting. Remember their offseason being more like impactful, like they were getting like big guys, but I guess the Bogaerts deal was sort of the thing that swayed everybody's decision on what their offseason was. And then they signed a bunch of role players, which sort of fill all the holes that were created when all the other guys left NC. So they sort of filled all their holes really well, and then brought in Xander Bogaerts. And then to top things off, they went the extension route, extended an old man in Yu Darvish, which should pay off pretty well. And they probably the biggest extension of the offseason was the Machado one. And I think we're important, and that honestly pushes up their grade more than any other extension would, because that was sort of one where it's like he is about to be a free agent, figure that like in the next week, and they did it. They got the job done. They're keeping him around, and now they don't really have to worry about having his sights set elsewhere, or having his mind thinking about going to do in the offseason. Now he can just focus on the championship. But yeah, I think I'm going S tier, despite how like uninspiring. A lot of the guys that they got, I think just getting Bogart all the holes that they needed to fill, like I think that was more than enough combined with those extensions to put them over the top.
Yeah, I would have given this an S if they signed nobody else but Bogarts and made those 2 extensions. But they added a lot of those guys that I think kind of puts the icing on top of the cake. The only thing that they really need to worry about now is Soto. Really, Soto is the big one that they need to extend. But they extended Manny Machado, and if you've watched any of the other episodes of the podcast, I think I talk about Manny Machado at least once every podcast because I just think he's an excellent baseball player. Yeah, I really like their offseason just because they filled some holes. They lost some guys. Manaea, I think they'll live with. Clevenger, they can get him out. Josh Bell, Brandon Drury were guys they added deadline. Will Myers and Jorge Alfaro were kind of dead in the water. Jerkson Profar is he's okay. I mean, he's nothing special, but they're going to move Tatis back in the outfield, so he's never going to have a place to play or start. And then Pierce Johnson plays for the Rockies now, so okay, they're really upset about it. They added some guys that I'm a big fan of, and if you talked about the 2 old men. Those are the 2 that I'm actually sort of the most interested about.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough, because if you look at their lineup, the strength of it is so crazy top to bottom because it has Machado, Bogarts, Tatis, Soto, just as like your top 4, which is wild. And then you have guys like Trent Grisham, Ha-Seong Kim, Jake Cronenworth. And then now you have the opportunity to have these 2 old guys platoon at DH of Matt Carpenter against righties and Nelson Cruz against lefties, which is just crazy to me. I know Carpenter had a really hot start when he played, and then he got injured, unfortunately. And then Nelson Cruz wasn't much of a factor with the Nationals, but he probably had the Nationals stink all over him, which kind of ruins that for him. So yeah, it's a really exciting offseason just because this lineup looks so ridiculous top to bottom with all these additions. And the 2 extensions kind of lock them into, even if they don't extend Soto, they still have a very competitive core that they should be really, really good for the next 5 or 6 years. While a lot of these guys, like Machado's 30, Bogarts is 30. So a lot of these guys get a little bit older. Maybe you sort of fall off, but we'll see. I really like their offseason because they're very clearly taking all their poker chips and pushing them into the middle of the table, all in. For the next couple of years. So I love this for the Padres.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, they're one of the most fun teams in baseball. And, I can't be mad that teams are going out there and spending money and trying to be competitive because that's what you want to see.
Absolutely. And then the last one we're going to talk about is the Dodgers, who obviously won the division going away last year. And they made some additions of certain levels of consequence. They, through free agency, they retained Clayton Kershaw, franchise legend Clayton Kershaw. They added Shelby Miller, Jason Hayward, Noah Syndergaard, Bradley Zimmer, JD Martinez, David Peralta, and Alex Reyes. They traded for Miguel Rojas and JP Fireisen. And then through free agency, they lost quite a few guys. They lost Joey Gallo, Kevin Pillar, Trey Turner, Tommy Kahnle, Andrew Heaney, Tyler Anderson, Craig Kimbrell, David Price, Chris Martin, Hanser Alberto, Justin Turner, Cody Bellinger, Edwin Rios, and then they catapulted Trevor Bauer away from their baseball team because he now plays for the Yokohama DNA Bay Stars in the NPB, and hopefully we'll never hear about him ever again. So, they also had 2 extensions. They extended Miguel Rojas after they traded for him, and they extended Tony Gonsolin. So, I mean, you're the world's #1 Dodger hater, so I will let you go first again.
Yeah, it's hard for me to give them any praise, but I'll start off by doing that. And getting rid of Trevor Bauer was the right thing to do. I wish they would have done it quicker. They sort of seem to think about it for a little bit too long. It's sort of like when you ask your friend like a question where it's just like, have you ever considered murdering someone? And then they're just like, no. That should be like an immediate no. You shouldn't have to think about that. Which is sort of what the Dodgers did when the suspension to Bauer expired early for some reason. But I was glad that they got rid of him. So that gives them a little bit of positivity in my eyes. But outside of that, it's not looking too good. I mean, the Kershaw signing is expected. You know, they're not going to let him go to another team. He's the franchise legend. I don't think he's ever going to pitch for another team. And he's probably just going to sign 1-year contracts until he doesn't want to pitch anymore or he can't pitch anymore. And outside of that, I don't like anybody else they signed. We all know that the Dodgers can do wondrous things with players, bring them in and turn them into all-stars or recover their lost form, which seems like that might happen with Jason Hayward. They could do some crazy stuff with Alex Reyes, who just needs to stay healthy. And maybe they can help JD Martinez rediscover his power stroke. But this is a lot of just like old role players or guys that have declining skills or injury guys, or in Hayward's case, just guys that sort of suck now. And then you have Noah Syndergaard, who I am not really a fan of at all. He's just sort of a solid guy, and I just don't think he's going to reach another level. It's just not really inspiring what they did in terms of additions. And that would sort of earn them a C in my book if that was it. But then they lost so many good players. Like Joey Gallo, that's an interesting one because he's like more of an upside play at this point because he's struggled so much across the past couple of seasons. But then they lost Trey Turner. They lost Tyler Anderson after a huge breakout season. The same can be said for Andrew Heaney, just on a lesser extent. You can also say Craig Kimbrell, one of the best closers of all time. They lost him, even though he's not the same guy he once used to be. I think David Price actually might have retired. He's gone as well, one of the former. And they lost Justin Turner as well, who's been a staple on their team for years. And Cody Bellinger, who won the MVP in, what year was that? 2017? 2018? 2019. 2019.
Yeah, 2019.
2019. And that one, they could have retained him, and they were just like, yeah, no, we can't figure this one out. He's done for. We're not paying him $18 million to suck. And that's just so much talent that they lost. And that's not even mentioning like the role players that they lost on the edges of the roster. That's huge. And the fact that they're able to still put out a team that you think is going to be pretty solid is a testament to how well run of an organization they are, unfortunately. But they just lost so many star players, and they did not bring in any star players. They added a bunch of role-playing guys. So I want to lean F, and I think that's because I am a very anti-Dodgers. And you know what? I'm just gonna let myself go for it. This is an F for me. This is a team that is fighting against the Padres, who are doing everything in their mind, everything that they can possibly do to win baseball games. And the Dodgers are like, we are trying to get under the luxury tax. Hopefully, Shohei Ohtani, probably for Shohei Ohtani. But they didn't do a lot. And it's like, why would you let this run of success end just because, you know, you have all these guys hitting free agency and you're not interested in whoever's on fire? And I'm sure they're going to be able to call up some prospects and replace the guys in the rotation that they lost. And I think the offense is going to be fine, but we've already seen they've had a couple injuries already. One of them being the guy that they extended in Tony Gonsolin, who had a great season last year, but it's weird to extend a guy on like the height of his career right now. And extend Miguel Rojas, who I don't really have too much faith in, especially offense. You know, we've already seen Gavin Lux out for the season, and now they already looking sort of screwed. They're like, shoot, we did not expect to have Miguel Rojas being our everyday shortstop and relying on like James Outman in the outfield and moving Chris Taylor all around the place. I think they're just a couple small injuries away from really looking like a bad team. And both of us had the bold prediction that they're going to be like the last wild card team into the playoffs this year, but it's really not looking good for them. And not that I wish they would have done something more, but I would have thought that they would have done something more as in a pretty competitive division.
Yeah, my thoughts are similar to yours, but I think I would give them a C in a vacuum. And then based on the other factors, especially relating to their division, I would give this an F, and I think it's an F going away. It's not very inspiring. They got Clayton Kershaw. They kept him around. I think that's one to be excited about. You get to see another year of Clayton Kershaw. Cool. Shelby Miller, sure. Whatever. Jason Hayward is of minimal consequence. Fire Eisen has had very high potential. I liked that trade. But then Syndergaard is so average. And they needed help in the rotation. They replaced Tyler Anderson, who looked really good last year. He had a breakout. He was very good. And they just let him walk. And now they replaced him with Noah Syndergaard, who is just, I mean, he's fine, I guess. But are you really going to unlock more out of him at this point? No. Bradley Zimmer, who cares? JD Martinez sort of lost the power stroke last year. And then Miguel Rojas, he's not much of a hitter. I get he's a great glove, but that's it. They already extended him. So they're going to keep him around. David Peralta, he's struggled in the last couple of years. And then Alex Reyes can't stay healthy. But if he is healthy, they could potentially get something out of him. The biggest thing with them is just all the guys they lost. I already talked about Tyler Anderson. Heaney was good for them last year. David Price isn't officially retired, but he's not going to pitch this year. They didn't say he was retiring, but he's effectively retired. Like Justin Turner and Bellinger felt like forever Dodgers. Like they felt like they were going to be there forever. And Justin Turner was like the heart and soul is what it felt like of all those playoff teams. It felt like their offense kind of flowed through him, and he was like the most dangerous hitter in their lineup for whatever reason. And then obviously Gallo and Turner. Even if you're not the biggest Gallo fan, Gallo had a pretty decent little spell with the Dodgers at the end of the year after struggling so bad with the Yankees. And he's another guy that this lineup really could have sorely missed. And even in looking at like their biggest threat to the division, the Padres, they had a great offseason. Sure, they got Bogarts and all the other guys. But even if you want to go look at another team that really challenged them at the top of the division, just a couple of seasons ago, the Giants lineup got so much better with guys that the Dodgers could have signed, like Jock Peterson, like Mitch Haniger, like Michael Conforto. And they passed up on those guys really to sign a bunch of just guys that played. Like, is Jason Hayward really going to be moving the needle for you? Or is he just kind of like let's see what we got sort of guy? Because I'm leaning towards the second one. Obviously, they got rid of Bauer. That's a good move. Even if, they cleared him of all the charges, the bad vibes that dude just takes to your clubhouse, they literally, like, all the players voted like, nah, we don't want that dude around here. So I get it, but the moves that they made are fine in a vacuum. But given that this is the Dodgers and the Dodgers are kind of expected to win this division every single year and be a World Series contender every single year, this team doesn't look nearly like the powerhouse that it's been for so long. You obviously still have Mookie. You obviously have Freddie Freeman. I get it. But at the same time, you lost so much. Trey Turner, Gallo, everyone, and then the rest of your division outside of the Rockies. Don't get me wrong, outside of the Rockies. Everyone else in your division got better. I feel like the Dodgers are closer to like a 88 to 90 win team than really a stud like shoe-in World Series contender anymore. And that's, I guess if you're a Dodgers fan, it would be difficult to stomach, but I'm not mad about it. But yeah, this felt like them kind of taking the ball and punting it on 4th and 2 when they had plenty of chances to make their team better. Still, they just kind of were like, nah, we're good. We'll look towards next offseason. Maybe they do get Ohtani. And if they do, the whole thing is worth it. But if they don't, then what's your plan? Because they're probably going to end up spending on somebody. It's just, their rotation's getting old. Isn't Urias up to be a free agent in a year or so?
Yeah, I think he's a free agent next year.
They have big decisions to make regarding their team, and they are just filling a bunch of the holes that they have with guys that are literally the definition of mid. Like they're pretty much replacement level players. Noah Syndergaard's a replacement level pitcher. That is what he is now. Jason Hayward is a 4th or 5th outfielder at best. David Peralta is a guy that you can throw in there. Reyes has got a lot of potential if he actually stays healthy, but he just doesn't do that. Like, they added a bunch of guys that just play baseball and not a lot of guys that make them better. And for me, because they're the Dodgers, I think that's more or less unacceptable. I would give them an F by a long shot. It's not flat out, pure and simple, not good enough.
Feels like the beginning of the end, to be honest.
Yeah, it does. It does. It either feels like the beginning of the end, or it could be more. I know I'll use another football analogy just because I said they punted on 4th and 2. It feels like this could either be, okay, we're about to be done with our little run, or it could be something like the Rams, where the Rams just kind of take a year and reload. they'll take a year and tank and try to figure it out, and then they reload next year. But I mean, it's not like they have a draft that really gives you instant impact guys. It's like, well, we need to prepare for next free agency. They have to hit big in next free agency or with a huge trade, or else this team just looks very okay. And I would be sort of upset with that if I was a Dodgers fan.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't feel too confident about their team going into next season, especially with like their stars being a year older and they're going to lose more guys to free agency. It's really going to be a big season for them this year to see what their player development in terms of like the young guys coming up through the minor leagues, as well as like guys that are out on the roster like Miguel Vargas, guys like that. And if Gavin Lux can come back strong, but
that's
it's going to be
thing too. Is they've got a lot of guys that could come up and be good, like Miguel Vargas, like I think Cartaya's on the way, Bobby Miller, Michael Bush, and like James Outman. But like if those guys don't pan out, you're screwed. Like that's what it feels like. If those guys don't pan out, well, Dodgers are done.
Then they got to spend $300 million offseason, or they're out of there, because the Giants they're looking. Giants and Diamondbacks seem like they're on the rise, and the Padres seem like this is going to be the year where they're like, all right, now this is our division. See you later, Dodgers.
That's exactly what it feels like. It feels like the Dodgers. It feels like the Dodgers completely stood pat, and they're like, okay, fine, we're the Dodgers, we'll figure it out. And everybody else, except for the Rockies, because I need to make that
abundantly clear.
So everybody else takes a step forward. Dodgers stay right where they're at, and that's just
or take a step back. This is the another SpongeBob meme, the ice cream one. Now let him have it.
Now let him have it. That's okay. You can have it. That's what it felt like. That's what it feels like, and it's. I don't know. I've talked about it a lot, but it's not good enough. I'd be pissed off if I was a Dodgers fan, because that's like, it's so frustrating, because that stuff happens when your team thinks that they're smarter than everybody else and that they can figure it out and just be better. And if the Dodgers don't, then they really deserve what they've got coming to them, and they deserve to lose the division. Maybe they are smarter than everybody else. Maybe James Outman will turn into Barry Bonds, or maybe Miguel Vargas will be excellent. He'll give you 6 WAR, but otherwise, I'm not confident. What I am confident in, however, is ending our podcast off with a bang, like we always do, by talking about one of the greatest closers from the past history of baseball. And this week, we've got a very exciting one I've been wanting to suggest for a while, and Jake read my mind on it. Nice. This week we're bringing in a closer, and that closer is going to be
Rod Beck. Yes, we have another guy,
mullet and mustache.
Yeah, I was going to
a lot of 80 grade point. Had a lot of 80 grade mustaches for bringing the closer, but this is the first 80 grade mullet. And yeah,
well, he's got a crazy mustache too.
Yeah, he does.
That was something I was going to mention. I was like going to say that something that Davis is usually contributing, pretty much the only thing Davis contributes to bringing the closer, is mentioning what kind of facial hair the guy has.
It's an awesome facial hair. He's got like the Hulk Hogan mustache.
Yeah, handlebar. Yeah.
Have you seen the if you're watching, you should Google Rod Beck, and you should go find one specific Cubs image where it's like him sitting forward like this. It's got like his arms out like this. It's like the blue steel picture from Zoolander, and it's just him in this absolutely magnificent mullet and mustache combo. It's just the best picture on the internet. Did we lose Jake for bringing the closer? Let's see what's going on. Oh, no. Oh, no. Okay. So Jake has been completely annihilated by his internet. So I will pick up with bringing the closer. And we're talking about Rod Beck, of course. So Rod Beck had a 13-year career in Major League Baseball, 1991 to 2004. And we're talking about him today because he was a member of the Giants and the Padres, as well as the Cubs and the Red Sox. And he was drafted by another one of Jake's teams, by the A's, in the 13th round of the 1986 draft. Jake has now returned. He was traded to the Giants prior to 1988, still in the minors, nicknamed Shooter. And if you go back and look at him, he looks like an Old West gunslinger. He's got the crazy mustache all the way down to here. He's got the mullet. He looks completely intense. He threw a sinker, a slider, and a splitter. And I will let Jake continue from there with his debut.
Sure. Yeah. So he debuted in May of 1991 versus the Expos, during which he pitched a couple of innings, and he wasn't too great, allowing 3 hits and 2 earned runs. He didn't walk or strike out anybody, but he bounced back from that rough debut to have a successful rookie campaign, during which he pitched 52 and a third innings pitched with a 3.78 ERA and a singular save, the first of his career. And that sprung him into a great second season, which partway through his sophomore season in 1992, in the midst of the best year. He took over the closer role from Dave Righetti, and that year he pitched a career high 92 innings pitched with a career high 87 strikeouts, a career best 1.76 ERA, a career best 0.84 WHIP, and 17 saves. Just an all-around amazing season, and that was his big breakout. And he finally received his proper recognition the following year, as he had sort of placed himself as one of the best closers in all 93. That year, he pitched 79 in the third innings with a 2.16 ERA, a 0.88 WHIP, and 40 saves, leading the major leagues with 71 games finished. He was elected to his first All-Star team and finished 12th in National League MVP voting. Success into a successful strike shortened 1994 campaign, during which he tossed 48 and 2/3 innings with a 2.77 ERA and 28 saves. The craziest part is not only did he lead the major leagues with 47 games finished, but he only pitched 48 games. Of the 48 games he appeared in, 47 of them were closing out ball games, and that earned him his second All-Star appearance of his career. He finished 8th in NL Cy Young Award voting and earned his only National League Raw-Aids Relief Man of the Year award. In 1995, that was the first year he dealt with adversity, pitching to a 4.45 ERA, but he still locked down a very solid amount of 33 saves and bounced back solidly in 1996 with a 3.34 ERA and 30 saves, and then earned and final All-Star in 1990, pitching to a 3.47 ERA with 37 saves and a National League leading 66 games appeared in. He finished 24th in National League voting that year. The following offseason, he signed with the Cubs as a free agent prior to 1998, and he found immediate success in Chicago, pitching to a 3.02 ERA with a career high 51 saves. That season, he led the National League with 80 games and base 70 games finished. Unfortunately, he struggled mightily to start the 1999 campaign and was traded halfway through the season to the Red Sox. In that first half of the Cubs, he tossed 30 innings with a 7.80 ERA, absolutely terrible. And in the second half, he had a 1.93 ERA with 14 innings across 14 innings with the Red Sox. Just crazy night and day first and second half there. And then he was a setup man for the Red Sox for the next 2 full seasons, pitching to a 3.10 ERA in 2000 and a 3.90 ERA with 6 saves in 2001. But unfortunately, he had to have Tommy John surgery following the 2001 season and missed the entire 2002 campaign. He signed with the Cubs upon his return and pitched in the minor leagues there. And one of the craziest things that was mentioned in his wiki is that during that time, he lived at home, like right outside the ballpark, which is crazy. That was making national news at the time. He didn't make it back to the majors with the Cubs and was released by the team in May of 2003, but he signed on with the Padres and had one final great season in 2003, pitching to a 1.78 with 20 saves before falling apart at the age of 35 in 2004, pitching to a 6.38 ERA before calling it a career in which he racked up 11.3 Baseball Reference WAR across 768 innings with 644 strikeouts, pitching to a 3.30 ERA, 1.1 slip, and 286 saves, which is good for 34th on the all-time saves leaderboard.
Oh, yeah. Rod Beck is one of my favorite closers of all time, just because of his personality and how he looked and how he played and how he lived, which is unfortunate because he is not with us very long. But He was a very cool player in his life. They nicknamed him Shooter. And there's a bunch of stories about him being in the clubhouse, and instead of like the attendants and whatever going around like picking up stuff, he'd like and asking them to pick up stuff after him. He'd ask him if he wanted to go have a smoke with him and get a beer. That he was typically with a cigarette and Coors Light in the other hand. So he was a
nice, healthy individual.
Yeah, if you go look at pictures of him, you'd be like, yeah, that fits.
Makes sense. Yeah, Shooter really fits his aesthetic.
Oh yeah. But another thing that's really wonderful about him is he shares heritage with all of our teams. The A's, because they drafted him, the Giants because he had some good years there, and obviously with the Cubs, and then some cool stats because not only do the only things I provide to this be the facial hair grade on the prospect ranking scale. I can get a cool fun fact about him. So there's a couple about him that I think are really cool. In 94, he led in games finished. He never had a single blown save. He won the relief man, which is the only time they had the relief man, because then they changed it to the Raleigh's relief man. So he won the untitled Raleigh's relief man award.
Okay.
And then another cool Cubs thing about that is along with Randy Myers, they had along with Randy Myers, him and Rod Beck both had 50 or more saves in the same season for the same team.
What? No way.
Yep.
What are you talking about? How's it? That doesn't even make sense.
So maybe I'm reading this wrong. In 93, Randy Myers, he became the first Cubs pitcher to get 50 more saves during the same season with a record of 53 saves. So he became the second one with 50 saves, which is the most, or with 51 during the most season, with 51 saves during the season, which is the most in Chicago by a righty. So him and Randy Myers are the only Cubs pitchers to eclipse 50 saves during the same season. So I misread that. But him and Randy Myers are the only two Cubs pitchers that have got 50 saves in the same season for the Cubs as a righty and lefty pair. So Rod Beck, cool dude. Don't go read about everything else about him because it's very unfortunate. But yeah, he's a cool guy. Go look at pictures of his mustache instead of reading them.
Good plan.
But that is all we have for this long episode of Free Baseball. Episode number 53, talk about the NL West. Soon we'll actually be able to talk about real baseball. That matters in the actual season because the season is going to start after next week. Join us for the last little bit of wrap up next week, next Wednesday. And then after that, we'll be talking about the actual season and fun storylines. So as always, I'm Dave Spurd. You can follow me on Twitter at DVSBird. That is the only social media that I actually use. So follow me there. You can follow Jake Crumpler at Jake Crumpler, and then you can read all of Jake's sites.
Yeah, add Davis as a friend on Facebook. He'll love it.
Don't do that.
Yeah, you can check out all my work at crumplerbaseball.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Jake Crumpler. I write for The Athletes Hub, which I'll hopefully put out one article before the offseason is over. It's been a while, but I've had a lot of work for other websites and for real jobs. But those other websites include .com, where I've been pumping out the articles and the podcasts. The baseballhq.com, where you can sign up for a subscription and read my playing time analysis. And yeah, that's basically about it. I'm pumped for the season to start. Excited to have our final offseason episode next week, the day before opening day, and super pumped to be playing MLB The Show by the next time we talk.
Yeah, that's going to be a really, really fun time. Yeah, go read all of the stuff on the athleteshub.org and follow Athletes Hub on Twitter at Athletes Hub. We're posting a bunch of stuff, not only just for the baseball season, but for basketball as well. All sorts of stuff coming out, especially fantasy related. And just check us out. We're more geared towards being the fan side of things rather than the major media side of things. It's a lot of opinions. and a lot of fun things that you can read from real sports fans like yourself. That's all we have for this week, though, unfortunately. So check back in with us next Wednesday for our last little episode before the season starts. Peace.